Hey guys, welcome to the last 5 chapters of Hyper-Borea, chapter 20 being the end. We're coming in close. If you have any predictions for the ending, or if you want to comment and talk about the stuff you've liked, I invite you to do so in any of these chapters. As well, remember to like the video, and in the description we have the link to the Amazon page, which we have the Kindle version and the physical copy that you can buy. The Kindle edition is only $2.99, even if you plan on not reading it at all, but listening to it. It'd be super helpful if you bought that. I appreciate you guys, and I hope to hear what you've enjoyed about the book so far. Chapter 17. Without remorse for the witch, I turned to the vortex. It was a medium-sized circle, stones of varying shapes and sizes laid out in uniform circular patterns. I stepped inside, curious if the portal would work, or if a catalyst or spell were required. To my delight, the stones began to hover almost instantaneously. They rose up around me, just as the chalk had in Rensharo, the pebbles and rocks spinning slowly, then quickly, as red, as rusty as the bell rock I stood upon, glowing brighter and brighter. A sensation of cold water next, immersing me from head to toe, and if one could feel beyond the shock of that sensation, the individual noticed a slight tugging feeling. The views of desert and clouded sky faded from my vision, and by contrast, I was placed in utter darkness. But just by contrast. I stood motionless, my surroundings clear, the level of light much lower. My eyes would adjust at a speed to exceed the average man's, but would need time nonetheless. I was in a cavern, a tunnel. It was long, but not long enough for me not to see the end. About 10 steps away was a sharp left turn. It was narrow, too. If I had stretched out each arm, I would have touched both walls. Beautiful geodes like those I saw in the crystal magic shop protruded from the walls and ceiling. They were illuminated like torches without a flicker, and were a shade of lighter blue instead of the yellow of a flame. The blue was as the sky, just with a touch more green. My jeweled slippers were comfortable, resting on a soft dirt top layer, but the ground being firm beneath. I could see the walls now, rough sandstone, but sturdy. Next, I listened, and I heard the drip-drop of water droplets falling through the air and collecting into puddles. I heard something else, too, more distant. I strained my enhanced sense of hearing, and it was what I believed to be a splashing sound. What had that simple witch called this place? A cavern under the devil's kitchen sinkhole. While reading about Jesus, I had read about this devil character. Vain, arrogant, power-hungry, basically how all of my critics referred to me. I cast 2 spells, one to muffle the sound of my movement, and another, more complicated piece of magic that would detect traps within my proximity. With my mind honed to detect magic, I took my first steps, mindful of the noises around me, alert in the case of a change beyond the dripping of water. It was down my tunnel, and then a cautious left, a bigger room now that curved right. The walls were 4 times as far apart, and the ceiling 3 times as high. I kept my pace, slow, methodical, following the tunnels right, then left, then right again. There was never an expansion as great as the first, but the tunnel grew larger and larger. The geodes of light grew too, forming stalagmites and their brother stalactites. As well, audibly, as I progressed, the sound of water rushing grew louder and louder. It wasn't constant, but it was consistent. A rush, then pause, then a rush. It was becoming so boisterous that I was wondering, with each turn, when I would come upon the source, until finally I did. Around my last corner was a body of water, of a scale I had not expected to find underground. 'Twas a small lake, approximately 1,000 feet in diameter. In the center, an island no greater than a few steps across, with a glowing red vortex. A man was suspended about 10 feet high, his torso and upper body protruding from a cyclone of water that held him aloft. With a dramatic movement of his arms, in timing with the sounds I had heard earlier, he raised a cyclone besides his, a fury of water that shaped itself into a cone, with a tip at the bottom and 2 arms. The arms were ornamented with a silver bracer studded with blue gems. The now created water elemental floated a few inches above the surface of the lake, then hovered over to and disappeared through the vortex on the island, not a few feet away. The man was shirtless. The only clothing I could see were a matching pair of silver bracers. Exploding his head or encasing him with ice, then lighting him on fire were my first few thoughts. His crime being the subjugation and killing of so many innocents that went into this creation of these elementals. The adults I cared not too greatly for, but I had seen children in the footage provided by the man called Mendoza. But alas, I would not exact justice so soon. I wished to hear him speak, to gain any knowledge I could before I continued on to the next cavern. How many of these fellows were there, anyhow? I reflected on my dream. 6, not counting the lesser witches and shaman they seemed to have recruited. I surveyed the expansive room. What would this fellow do when he was aware of my presence? Most importantly, he would stop summoning those wicked-looking elementals. Each one that entered that portal was likely going to Sedona to enter the fight. Without magic, I was unaware how my allies would defeat them. They'd have to hope the witches' forces engaged them. Looking on him, I realized he was different from the rest of his ilk. What had he been called? Talek? He did not appear as a skinwalker, no. The others were filthy and had ruined flesh and scars. He was fit, full, and had an overall healthful look about him. Had he been recruited from another source than the others? I had no idea, but it was time to get his attention. "You there, Talek, come and parley with me." The summoning ceased, and the man's cyclone rotated to face me. He smiled broadly and began leaning forward, the cyclone carrying him toward me with a gyrating motion. He was speaking at the same time in a booming voice. "Medicine man!" His pitch was deep, his words elongated. He almost seemed happy to see me. As he drew closer, I was amazed at the difference in his appearance to his comrades. Was it proper hydration to blame? "Ah, ah, ah!" He laughed. "It is I, Talek, who will capture you! What a treat!" He was within 20 steps now, the gyrating halting, the cyclone holding him in place above me. "Your magic will be no match for the power," he said the word loudly, "the power of pure and filtered water. Water drawn through the earth, water clean and malleable." "Yes, I'm sure," I patronized. "Tell me, what is your plan? What station do you hold? Are you more or less powerful than your friends?" I was not one to beat around the bush, as it is said. "Ah, ha, ha, ha!" His cyclone grew another 10 feet, then 20. He stood atop it now. "You are in my realm, the realm of pure water." He leapt from his stand and dove toward the lake beneath, his rough-spun pants billowing as he descended. "Face me in the deep." The water splashed gently as he disappeared from my view. "Rats," I mumbled. No answers from the water fairy. I levitated myself to the space above where he had dived, hovering over the surface as his cyclone receded and melted back into the placid waters. I reached a hand into my ingredients bag and consumed 3 batteries, then fired a massive bolt of lightning into the water. Steam and vapor cascaded off of my personal protective force shield from the explosion. I had closed my eyes for it, and through the lids saw the white-hot reaction. Unceremoniously, Talek floated to the surface, face down, his skin scorched, and his left arm and right leg missing. What had the fool expected? That I would pursue him into the water? Had he envisioned that I would transform into a shark and seek him out among the seaweed forests and murky depths that likely lay at the bottom of this lake? I did not possess the ingredients to carry out that potential battle, nor the time to entertain fighting on his terms. 5 more to go, I laughed to myself, at the lack of theater that brought about the demise of such a dramatic villain. I turned, floating to the island. It appeared to be the only place to go. I thought of my next moves, through the portal, then back to consulting the map for the next vortex to try. As I floated and drew near, I felt another invasion of my mind, more of an intrusion. This same feeling as before felt familiar, even more so now that I had experienced it so recently. The feeling was directed me to look up. This intruder had guided me before into what proved to be the opposite of a trap. I was intrigued. Who was this? Was I foolish enough to be helping him or her? What if it was the head shaman, and he was consolidating his power? No, I did not suspect that was the case. It appeared he needed all the help he could get. Plus, he would be far more powerful than these underlings, given his access to the artifact, the staff. I complied with the intrusion and looked skyward, the beautiful geodes glowing. Sure enough, among them, a hole. I shifted shapes into a bird and flew in that direction, straight up toward the beautiful lights. I had more trust for my mind's intruder, given I had been led closer to my goals. However, I couldn't help but feel like an insect flying into torchlight by night and being burned as I drew nearer to the glowing geodes. I flew amongst the light blue lights and through the opening. Back in my regular form, I found the vortex on the floor of the small round room. It was shaped like an egg, the room, with a flat spot carved in the curved floor for the portal. Though I did not expect a trap this time, I recognized that I might still be being drawn into one. The sadistic leader of this band of skinwalkers may have sacrificed an unruly captain for the sake of my capture. I took solace in the fact that they did not want me killed, but captured. One of the only ways to stop me would be to kill me instantly, as capturing a wizard and keeping him were a tall order unless one was willing to commit tremendous resources and many, many powerful masters. I didn't believe that the infrastructure existed in this world. Without delay, I stepped forward and into the vortex. The clock was ticking now, as Talik's friends would wonder soon why production of water elementals had ceased. The stones of the circle rose, spun, red light enveloped me, and the cold water feeling washed over my head and down to my toes. I was immediately falling, my stomach pitting, wind blowing my clothing back. I would be dead in a few seconds as the ground came closer and closer. I shifted again, shapes into a bird, a sparrow, selecting a small avian so as to avoid detection and preserve any chance I still had at surprising my opponents. It was dark, the ceilings high, the cavern floor 100 feet below, lit by winding paths of blue light on the cold stone floor. This chamber was as large as Talik's, but was a maze of stalactites, the red stone fingers poking downward from the roof of this cavern, more dense in some places, less in others. I heard speaking below as I flew, and found a ledge carved out of the high cave walls from which I could perch in the dark. The chamber was large, as I said, but not a circle like the one with the lake. This one was an elongated crescent, and I had made my way toward the center from one side. Out of the bare stone had been carved an amphitheater, and I strained my hearing to listen in on the class being taught. The golems are bound two ways in the hierarchical order. First, to their creator, our chieftain, McLan. Second, to a commander, which will be one of you. Squawk! A lieutenant of the chief skinwalker instructed. His words had given me the answer to who wielded the artifact, a man named McLan. The eagle-beak shaman used chalk to draw on the stone wall. My vision was limited more than I liked as a sparrow, so I decided to shift back into my original form and watch the class. I was about 80 feet up, and the ledge was big enough for me as a human to sit. I transformed as the captain finished his drawing. Squawk! He indicated with his skinny arm a well-done picture of several golems following a skinwalker. You are being trusted with much power. These constructs will obey your every command. Our chieftain demands absolute loyalty, and so long as you satisfy this requirement, you will be rewarded. Very, very well. Squawk! Master Totol, I cringed as one of the low witches abused the rank of master in her reference to the shaman. Is there a range on the golems? Like how far can they go away from us? Squawk! Good question. He turned to draw, his back facing me. The ins and outs of golems, constructs, and elemental control were known to me, this being rather low-level instruction in the King's College. Satisfied to know the name of the man I would be obliterating in short order, Totol, I waved my finger in a circular pattern. The sandstone rock wall high above the class illuminated ever so slightly, no more than the light that would come from a struck match. The flame arced in a circle, with about 20 feet in diameter. Being so high up, the class was none the wiser. The flame completed the circle, and for a moment the only sound in the cavern was the teaching of Totol. Then there was a crack and a groan. The birdman and his students looked upward toward the opposite wall from where I sat. Their instincts not fast enough, their guard all the way down. With the haste of a boulder fallen off of a cliff, the dinnerplate-shaped hunk of cavern wall fell. It fell the 100 or so feet to the cold stone floor, crushing Totol and splattering his blood and guts across his chalk drawings with a loud whoom. His students screamed. Some 20 were gathered, and the 10 in the front row had their legs crushed. They were stuck under the weight of the rock. Though they likely deserved to suffer, I had read on young Saman's device that these people had killed innocent loved ones in order to obtain their twisted power. But alas, those in the second row were free, albeit dazed and confused. I held my hands in front of me as if gripping a ball, the size of my head, a flame conjured therein, growing into a sphere. The eyes of a fellow with his legs crushed met mine, his vision obstructed by long, bloody black hair. Before he could warn the others, I let my summoned flame ball fall. It sank the 80 feet, sinking being the correct descriptor, as it did not speed all the way down like the falling rock coin. Once it did hit the ground, though, its effects were just as devastating. The flames erupted outward along the ground, encompassing and consuming the students of Totol. There were screams, of course, but they were mostly drowned out as the oxygen was consumed by the fire, those still living quickly succumbing. I flew from my perch as a sparrow once more, leaving the charred bodies and destruction in my wake, as I made for the opposite end of the crescent I had entered from. I did not feel the tug of the intruder into my mind as I discovered the next vortex on the ground. I did wonder, however, how many of these portals were in each cavern, and where they all led. It must have been a complex network. The one I had come from was specifically designed for those with the ability to fly. Were there some hidden behind false doors, some in rooms that one had to enter only by shrinking to the size of a mouse, a dog, or a cat? I imagined the length of time it would require to learn them. The forces of this McLan seemed to know them well. How long had they ruled this region before the magic had dried up? I put the thought out of my mind. It was unwise for me to dwell on the injustices that were likely carried out under his regime. The twisted black magic wrought upon innocent babes. It would make my blood boil, and I needed to focus. My patron, the mind intruder, seemed to be trustworthy, but to what was his or her end? I wondered if I should ever find out. Into the next portal I stepped as a man, and out I stepped into a small chamber the size of a coat closet, a rudimentary wood ladder leading down. The noise of this place was almost overwhelming compared to the quiet consistency of the water and the low hum of instruction from the Birdman's crescent cave. There was the clang of pickaxe on stone, the screams of fear and agony, more distant yet loud even in my insulated hole, and finally the crunch of stone on stone as heavy footfalls of golems echoed across the rock. My magic detection was going haywire. This was the factory for the elemental army of the stain that called himself a chieftain. I caused myself to become invisible, casting my spell of muffled movement as well. Confident that I would be undetected by sight and sound, I let my trap detection expire, as this was too busy of an area for any defenses like that. I ventured forth, the chambers of this network smaller than the last two, but many tunnels and branches shooting off here and there. Work continued in almost every one of them. It reminded me of armies of kings preparing to go to war, blacksmiths finishing extensive orders of arms and armor, farriers outfitting horses for war, knights clothing and setting their gear for long rides, and slaves and servants running on errands for their lords and ladies. This was the nature of the work in these rooms, except tailored towards the desires of the leader McLan, golems crafted for the capture and harvesting of the population of Sedona. I followed the screams of agony and terror down a tunnel and into a circular and domed chamber. In the center was a large vortex that was constantly glowing red as golems came and went, carrying more prisoners in and throwing them into pens that lined the walls. Each one was crammed with people. I counted 30 cells in total. I stepped to the side to avoid the golem traffic, witnessing the horror of McLan's black magic personally now. He had altars set up, more like tables for surgery. He walked in rounds as golems tore unwilling participants from cages and placed them on these stone surfaces. Each one McLan touched, as he walked, began twisting and churning until they had become disfigured animals in the same manner that the bats who had attacked us earlier in Sedona looked. I walked about as well, careful to stay out of the way of the fray, observing the magic. It was relatively novel to me. No one in Alfheim would have a desire or will to carry out such demented casting. Were I visible, any observer would see my lip upturned and my nose scrunched in disgust. I followed this twisted clock of a room to midnight, where a cell sat nearly empty. Curious. My back turned to it, I watched McLan work. He found far too much satisfaction in his ghoulish business. I turned then to inspect this cage that was unlike the others, and therein sat two surprises, Kyle and the beautiful Silver. They looked ragged, depleted, sick and malnourished. How long had it been since I had seen them? Just a few days. Silver was covered in bruises, her wounds festering under torn clothing infected and red from the germs and bacteria wreaking havoc on her body. Kyle was in better shape, but not by much. I levitated up and stood on the wooden planks that formed their roof. I twirled my finger in the same manner I had with the stone coin that had fallen and crushed Totol, having a mind that I should do the same to this entire chamber, bury this disgusting display of magic away from the eyes of the world forever. But with the matchlight covering its course, the planks fell away below me, and a hole was formed for me to descend through. I spoke in a low whisper. "Kyle, Sylvia, it is I, Sovos." I calmed them as the planks clattered to the ground, the noise lost amongst the screams and groaning. Kyle sat up as stiff as a board. "I can't see you. Oh no, Sylvia, did you hear that?" he whispered, harshly. "I think I'm hearing voices now." "No," she breathed out, weakly stricken. "I heard it too." "Kyle, you twit, I am invisible to avoid detection from the large army outside your cage." "Oh, sorry," he said, a guilty look across his face, but he smiled nonetheless at my arrival. I felt a sense of shame at my impatience with him. There was a span of at least a couple of days that he and Silver had sat in their filth and watched the unspeakable horrors being carried out before them. I am here to finish off these skinwalkers. I will heal you both, then exit the cage and kill their leader. They both perked up and inched closer to the sound of my voice. I placed invisible hands on each of their shoulders, channeling just enough to give them the capability of escaping this foul pit, but not enough to strain me. I would need my strength for the next moments. Sylvia and Kyles both stretched, their skin looking better, their eyes more clear than milky as they were before. "Sovos?" Silver looked in my direction despite being unable to see me. "Yes." She was looking up, her hair a mess, but her eyes determined. "Go kill that bastard." I smiled. "Say no more, Silver." I levitated through the hole I had made and hatched my plan. It would take focus. It would take resources. Before me was the circular room, and the golems moved like cogs and gears beneath a clock's face. The cells were accessed seemingly at random, half being harvested and the other half remaining, locked, like Kyle and Silver's, by a crossbar of stone. McLan, the foul chief, walked around the circle to the altars. If I was at midnight, he was at 6 now and walking toward 5. The pudgy devil had a devious smile as he worked his foul deeds. I detected his magic. He possessed some type of shield. I could not tell how powerful it was, but there was no chance it could stand up to my combined attacks. I just needed him to stand idly while I cast them. I needed to distract him. Golems marched into the vortex at the center, as well as the newly minted human-animal hybrids. Freezing McLan in time would be my best bet, though I would have to draw near him first. If I did that, his golems could descend upon me after I became visible. As well, if I was in his proximity, there was a small chance he could detect my magical energy. No, distance was my ally, given the unknown variables. A plan came to my mind, the inspiration like a lightning bolt. First, I would throw off the crossbeams and open the cells. Second, I would commandeer command of half the golems and set them against the others. Third, I would use the chaos and launch a series of lightning, fire, and arcane missiles at the Skinwalker chieftain. Yes, then we would see how much of him was left over after that. I raised my hand, the other finding the ingredients in my bag. I mentally prepared, running through the plan, visualizing it, accounting for all the spells and ordering them correctly in sequence. All was set, the chieftain in my sights, the artifact being within my reach after his death. My country saved. But the portal emptied a new round of golems with their prisoners, and another skinwalker, a familiar face from my introductory dream. "Chief, good news to report. We are keeping the witches' forces at bay in the western half of the city." "Good, good," McLan responded in his cheerful mood. It was time I ruined his day. I snapped my fingers and the cells burst open. There was no change in the mechanical movement of the room at first. Everyone was unsure what was happening. The prisoners likely thinking it was some next phase of their captor's diabolical plans. But then I worked the more complex portion of the spell out. In my mind, the stone golems turning on each other and throwing heavy stone punches. "What are you doing?" McLan roared with rage and grabbed his head in frustration. Then, as if realizing how his constructs could have possibly begun to act this way, he turned about the room, with searching eyes, without a doubt looking for me. His eyes widened tremendously, as he watched a ball of flame rocket toward him, followed by lightning, then a bolt of arcane energy. He cast a hand forward, and an arc of black lightning met my fireball, the two spells incinerating each other. Then my lightning struck his shield. It was like a bubble from a swamp, dark brown and oozing. He seemed resigned then, his face stricken with fear and disappointment, with disgust, many emotions cycling as he realized his doom. But with an inhuman speed, his snake-like captain, as quickly as a viper strikes, jumped in front of the bolt of energy, taking it to the abdomen. It was my turn to be in shock, though. I quickly recovered and began to cast my next spell of attack. I froze his legs in place, but he was thinking too. He seemed to reach into his pocket then, throw something at the ground, and the room filled with black mist. I summoned a zephyr of wind to eradicate it, but it did not blow away as quickly as I had hoped. Not wasting time in conjuring another tornado, I enhanced my movement speed and leapt from the cage I stood upon, and covered the distance to 5 o'clock, not finding the chieftain there. He was going to get away. I engaged my sense of detection for magic, and spotted him, running through a wall of stone golems, and up an inclined tunnel. I wasted no time, following behind him as the room still exploded in chaos, the stone golems duking it out in the dark, the prisoners capitalizing on their captors' preoccupations and fleeing into the portal. It was my turn to be up the tunnel. I pumped my arms as I jogged, wishing I had the bone of a mammal with some ground speed.
The tunnel was narrow, so I cast my spell for trap detection as I ran. Thankfully, nothing, so far. It was left, then right, then left, then right, then straight and up. I nearly ran into a wall, but stopped as quickly as I could, standing at the top of a steep ramp and stepping into the vortex at the top. It was the same familiar transition as I went across space and into my next destination. I was prepared mentally, should I arrive and bring the cave down on me, shoot me off of a cliff, or lob an attack spell at me. I would have a counter, no matter what it was. None of those scenarios played out, however. As I arrived at a room of a circular shape, but much, much smaller than the prisoner's chamber I had just been in, I jogged up a few stairs to a wooden door shut tight and ripped it open, jogging through a tube-like chamber, and was met with a branch right and a branch left. I chose right, though it looked as if it didn't matter, given they both emptied out into a cavern at least 300 feet long and 100 wide. It was the most beautiful of all I had seen yet, with light like a rib cage and spine stretching along the ceiling and down into a pool of water along the walls. The water was glowing the same color as the light, that shade of blue, like the sky with a hint of green. Floating in the center as I came to a halt was my intended target, the skinwalker chieftain, McLan, the staff from my dream, the artifact in his hand.
"Medicine man, I am strong with the staff, here as the power source for my kingdom. But with potent key in my hands, I am invincible. Kneel and swear yourself to me."
He clutched his exposed painted belly with his free hand and laughed. With the artifact directly in his hands, he would prove to be more powerful indeed, though his magic was rough, amateur, and I was a professional. This would be a slight challenge, but not the fight this naive clout was thinking. "Surrender the artifact to me, and you may keep your life," I responded flatly. "There's no hope for you. I've killed most of your captains." His smile twisted and curled into a frown.
"How many?"
"Talek, Totol, and now your snake." He shook his head.
"I will take great pleasure in torturing you."
He jumped as if off of a platform and landed on his feet at the edge of the water some 100 feet in front of me. He then flicked his hand limply at me thrice. 3 globs of black slime hit the ground and started to fall over themselves toward me. Each was the size of a fish, and rolled, then lurched up and fell back down on their path. With each fall down, they expanded in size. When they were about halfway, they were the size of dogs. I thought of my Zephyr in the chamber we had come from, and I liked the idea, so I cast another. The small tornado, about 7 feet tall, wound across the space between us, and picked up the slimes as it propelled toward McLan. He held a hand back, and water from the pool came in a wave and dispersed the slime and Zephyr. He spun to cast a new spell, but instead was forced to summon a shield to block 5 fireballs I had launched while he was distracted. They were absorbed, but I had another 5 coming. Then a lightning bolt that struck at the blink of an eye, weakening his shield and causing the flames to come within inches of him. He had to lunge out of the way. My speed was something he was unused to, magical combat not something he was experienced engaging in. I froze his feet to the ground and caused that water from the pool to come out in waves crashing onto his back. They froze and he was entombed in ice. I then caused a boulder-sized chunk of rock to fall from the ceiling where he was, as I fired arcane bolts of energy as well, my efficiency stunning to him. But McLan had an advantage I did not possess. He teleported to my right, and the boulder-sized rock crashed down on the ice sculpture and was pelted by my magical attacks launched in vain.
"Enough!"
He was scared. I heard it in his voice.
"You are no simple medicine man. You are something else."
I turned to him, and he heaved the staff in my direction and hollered an animalistic grunt. A beam of energy shot forth toward me, and I was not expecting it to come as quickly as it did. It ate through my shield, the blue energy ward deteriorating from a thick shell to a translucent, then gone. I felt the heat of the beam as I held up my hands to meet it, feeling the power of McLan's assault, and harnessing my own from my reserves of arcane fuel from my meditation. I pushed his beam out a foot, then 2, then 3. He was 50 steps away, and my energy slowly crawled to meet him. Yes, this was it. I would have him. He was trapped. If he broke away from my spell, he would become destroyed. He didn't know what he was doing, his casting inefficient, imprecise. The beam coming from the staff was not of McLan. It was something that likely came from the memory of the artifact. Some artifacts keep a backlog of spells that their former masters would have wielded. I was curious who had used this one so much that the staff retained it. I used something similar for obliterating heavily armored foes or burrowing through shields and rock. McLan was not practiced in his casting, and his face showed that he saw my beam rivaling, then overcoming his. But then he was laughing. Why was he laughing? Was he hysterical, as it became more and more apparent that he was going to be overcome, that he was going to lose his precious artifact, his precious kingdom, and his precious life? No, there was something else in that laugh. He had beat me, or so he thought. But how? I felt it then. It was excruciating because I had not expected it, the surprise adding another element of pain. Deep fangs were now buried into my ankle. I screamed now in immense agony, and fell to one knee. The duel of spells coming to a halt. My vision was blurry, and I blinked, clearing it up. Well, clearing it up in one eye. Behind me crawled the snake minion, a chunk of his torso completely missing. "Sleep now." He coughed up blood, his expression a smile, twisted and cruel. It took everything I had left, but I held up a hand as my vision began to fade, my eyes going black with each blink. I fired one last lightning bolt into the grinning face, and the snake man's head exploded. I came to moments later, but I am unable to move, my eyes blinking slowly. McLan was entirely too close to me, and I desired with all my might to explode his head with the flick of my hand, but I could not move.
"Quetz has lost his body, but I put his spirit in a snake."
He held up the very snake he had referred to before my eyes.
"His venom will keep you asleep while I conquer your home."
The idiot thought I was from this place. He laughed mockingly, walking away and leaving me to blink. Drowsy. I was slipping from reality. My head fell back, my gaze fixed on the staff potent key as it floated in the air. I heard the tss of the snake somewhere around me as its foul venom lulled me to sleep. Would I awake with the full moon back home a failure? I would not be alone, with Gilberelle at my side. Likely still sedated, she would have free range over how she killed me, what kind of torture she would carry out before finishing me. The laughter of McLan faded away down the hallway tunnel behind me, as did my waking consciousness fade away.